education in South Africa. I encourage all participants to engage actively, share your insights, and collaborate in this collective endeavor. Let us harness our diverse experiences and expertise to forge a path forward that not only elevates the standard of Islamic education, but also empowers our future leaders to make meaningful contributions to society. In conclusion, I would like to extend my deepest appreciation to everyone who has worked tirelessly to organize this symposium. Your efforts have made the gathering possible, and your dedication to the cause of Islamic education is truly inspiring. May Allah Ta'ala bless our endeavors, guide our discussions, and grant us success in achieving our shared goals. Thank you once again for being here. Let us embark on this journey together with renewed commitment and determination. I thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
As we forge the path for future leaders, I'd like to say shukran to Sheikh Ihsan. And can you please give him another round of applause? Up next will be the keynote address by Professor Mohammed Ali Belao. It is my distinct honor to introduce Prof. Belao, a highly respected scholar and leader in the field of Islamic studies, and our distinguished guest speaker for the day. Prof. Belao holds several prestigious affiliations in the United Kingdom. He serves as the president of the Imam Training and Development. He is a member of the UK Fatwa Committee, and he heads the Quranic Recitation Committee. In Libya, he is a founding board member of the University of Mohammed bin Ali al-Sanusi Islamic. In Turkey, he is an advisory committee member in the Islamic Scholars Forum. Additionally, he is the esteemed member of the International Union of Muslim Scholars. Alhamdulillah. I could actually go on for days and days, volumes and volumes. He also possesses a wealth, as reflected through his impressive academic background, which includes a PhD in Islamic doctrine from the University of Qawarin, a PhD in Foundation of Fiqh from the Islamic University of Beirut, and a master's degree in Foundations of Fiqh with first-class honors. Additionally, he holds numerous certificates in the 10 modes of Quranic recitation, Islamic judiciary, teaching, human resources, and development. His work experience also spans across numerous countries, where he has served as an Imam and Khatib, delivering courses in Quranic recitation, fiqh, dawah, mosque management, and the role of women in Islam, and many more, which showcase a deep knowledge and expertise. I would humbly like to call upon Prof. Belao to the podium to render the keynote address on the historical roots of the problem of Islamic education, diagnosis, and proposed solution. Please give Prof. a round of applause.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل صلوات الله وتسليماته على معلم الناس الخير وهادي الخلق إلى الحق ومنقذ البشرية من الضلالة إلى الهدى سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. The respected scholars, professors and students of knowledge. Salaam Allahi alaykum wa rahmatuhu wa barakatuh. I'm very glad to be standing here in front of you, and subhanallah, on 19th of June, which is last Thursday, subhanallah, I felt that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala had removed the tyrants of the trip. I felt that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had expanded the space of love in my heart. And I felt that I moved from my home in Birmingham to my home in Cape Town. جزاكم الله خيرا ونسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يحفظكم ويرعاكم يا رب. So my this is my so my research around the symposium is the historical roots of the problem of Islamic education, diagnosis and proposed solution. We know that this Islamic education problem is not new. And Ibn Khaldun rahimahullah mentioned that in the Muqaddimah. Also, Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Nadwi rahimahullah, when he visited Al-Azhar at the first time, he found out that there's a problem in Islamic education, in Islamic curriculum, basically. And Ibn Ashur rahimahullah wrote a book called أَلَيْسَ الصُّبْحُ بِقَرِيبٍ. This book is about Islamic education, about the problem of Islamic education. And before them, Imam al-Maliki, Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi rahimahullah, mentioned that in many books. So the problem of the Islamic education, there's like a significant problem in many areas, in many fields, whether it was in curriculum, teaching, methodology, but there is a significant a problem. So as we know that our scholars, our older scholars tried to establish many organizations, many universities, many like sort of places of knowledge. The first university was Al-Qarawiyyin in Morocco, in Fas. Al-Qarawiyyin, when Idris al-Azhar rahimahullah, or they call it Idris al-Akbar, Idris al-Asghar. Idris al-Asghar, when he built Fas, as you know, his wife called Fatima al-Fihriya. Fatima al-Fihriya rahimahullah said, this is a great city. We must have a place for ulama. Then they built Al-Qarawiyyin. Al-Qarawiyyin was the first university in the world. And then after that, the Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar was built around 90 years after Al-Qarawiyyin. But the thing is that the curriculum, the methodology, the subjects remained as it is. As we are still in 7th century or something like that. So the problem in Islamic education is very deep and significant. Imam Mohammed bin Ali Sunusi rahimahullah, one of the Maliki scholars, went to the Al-Azhar. As we know, the Madhahib, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanafi, there's something called at-taqleed, imitation. When he went to Al-Azhar and met the ulama, one of the ulama said, نحن مالكيون نحن خليليون إن ضل ضللنا وإن أصاب أصبنا. We are following Khalil. And Khalil, one of the Maliki scholars, we are following Khalil, whether he was right or wrong. And this is called ta'assub. Then Imam Ibn Sunusi rahimahullah wrote a book called Shifaa al-Sadr. Shifaa al-Sadr is like something about the problem of education, problem of teaching Islamic knowledge. And then subhanallah, the scholars of Al-Azhar tried to kill him. That shows that the problem in Islamic education is very deep. And this problem is not just about the curriculum, about the methodology. It's about the scholars as well. It's about their behaviors, the way that they teach, and the way that the Islamic education became a source of money. The religion became a source of money, a source for dunya. And the Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah said, من علامة موت القلب أن يطلب الإنسان الدنيا بعمل الآخرة. من علامة موت القلب, the sign of the dead heart is to ask al-akhirah by الدنيا. أو you ask الدنيا by الآخرة. You ask الدنيا, you are looking for collecting money or status by what? By Islamic knowledge. This is the sign of the dead heart. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. So the problem is very deep. We have now in Islamic education, we have contemporary challenges. First, discount between religious and contemporary education. There's like very big gap. Most people think that if you are, let me put it bigger. Most people think that if you are following like Sharia, following Deen, that you have to be away from dunya. You have to be away from business. You have to be away from economy. That's completely wrong understanding. The discount between religious and contemporary or secular education is one of our challenges. And the other point is, mashallah, we have many graduates, but there is lack of practical skills or deep religious understanding. There's lack of that. You know how many people yearly graduated from Al-Azhar in Cairo, in Al-Qahira, in just Cairo? More than 45,000 Sheikh and Imam. Every year. This is just in Cairo, Al-Qahira. But where's the impact? Where's the athar in the dunya? Because there's the lack of practical skills and deep religious understanding. The other point is there's a lack of funding, outdated curricula, or lack of standard. This is very important point. Why discuss education reform? As I mentioned, Imam Ibn Ashur rahimahullah wrote a book called أليس الصبح بقريب. You know أليس الصبح بقريب? This is in Surah Hud, yeah? And Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala said, إن موعدهم الصبح أليس الصبح بقريب. And Ibn Ashur rahimahullah asked, أليس الصبح بقريب? Is the Fajr soon or later? Because the reform, the Islah of Ummah starts from education. The Islah of any Ummah, not just Muslim Ummah, any society, any country, the reform starts from education. If we reform the education, the society will be in the right direction, inshaAllah ta'ala. So the significant issue in our community, especially in Muslim community in South Africa, in UK, in the Muslim countries as well, there's a problem in education, in Islamic education. The problem of education in Islamic world as well. So reasons of the decline of Islamic education. First of all, lack of oversight. Because now the Islamic institution, the Islamic organizations, most of them based on trust, based on thiqah. But this is not a professional. Most of them are not working on a professional way. There's no raqaba, there's no observing. This is the first reason. The second reason is lack of regulation. There's a very deep problem in regulation. The third point is absence of moral and ethical training. And as we know, in Japan, after the Hiroshima, and they ask themselves why the world didn't stop this thing. And then they understood that the world hated them. And then they started teaching ethics training, ethical training, akhlaq, adab. So it's like very deep lack in that field. There's a lack of freedom, of criticism. And we need to know that there is a big difference between كلام الفقهاء وكلام الله تبارك وتعالى. There's a big difference between the words of Allah, the Sharia, and the words of fuqaha. The words of fuqaha or كلام الفقهاء, it's not muqaddas. It's not sacred. We can't say that Imam Malik, or Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, or Shafi'i, or Ahmad ibn Hanbal, they said that means we can't discuss that. That we can discuss that. We can discuss their opinions, but in a good way. In adab, in akhlaq. So, كلام الفقهاء واقع, that we call it بين التقديس والتبخيس. Between taqdis and tabkhis. Some people said there's no value of their opinions. That's completely wrong. And some people think that, their opinions are sacred. But that's completely wrong as well. We need to have the Wasatiyyah, and our symposium is Wasatiyyah, alhamdulillah. The next point is political challenges. And this is very major in many Muslim countries, in most of the countries basically. Political. The education became a political thing. The last point is constraints of resources. And this is very understood, inshallah ta'ala. Now, proposed solutions, inshallah. How can we fix these problems in our Islamic education? First, curriculum reform. We have to mix between religious modules or Islamic modules and the contemporary knowledge as well. That's what we did, alhamdulillah tabarak ta'ala, in Imam Foundation. In Imam Foundation, we have very high level courses. We have one of the courses, technical Imam. We teach Imam about metaverse, AI, social media. How can they use AI and metaverse, social media in da'wah? How can engage with their community in da'wah through these platforms? Our courses is about the training imams in media, in ilm. Because if we looked at our, mashallah, curriculum in our universities, the result is many copies of books. They memorize for the exam and put the information on the paper and they forgot everything after that. Wallahi, subhanallah, one day I was in one of the Arab countries, I don't want to mention it. That time was like there's A-levels exams. I saw this student, after they came out from the school, after they finished the exam, they throw their books on the bins, wal-'iyadhu billah. And there's Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, there's Qala Allah, there's Qala Rasul. Because as I said, the ilm, the knowledge, became a road to dunya. That's it. To get a job, to get certification, to be like a professor. But it's not a way for islah, it's not a way for reform ourselves and our community. The next point is critical thinking and methodology. We need to build that in our student. We need to teach them how to say no, how to think, not to take what we say. We need to teach them to think about what we say, not to take it as it is. The second point is institutional collaboration. We need to collaborative with many organizations, Islamic organization, secular organization, normal universities, Islamic universities, inshallah ta'ala. The next point is teacher training and development. And this is part of the reform, islah. If there is no teacher training, there is no knowledge. If there is no teacher development, there won't be reform, there won't be islah in our education. And technology, that's very understood. Because technology now, it's involved in every single thing in our life. So we have to teach that. We have to use technology in da'wah. We have to use technology in our education. And community and stakeholder engagement, and this is understood. Dear brothers and sisters, the reforming any community, reforming any country, starts from reforming the education. If we need Muslim leaders for our community, we need to reform the education. We need to measure between education, between skills, between the training, between the development. We can't just feed them with information without any skills. And last thing, subhanallah, when I entered to this campus, mashallah, I remembered when Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam one day delayed on Salat al-Isha. And the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum were waiting. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came out, and Sayyidina Bilal radiyallahu anhu was about to do iqamat salah. Then our beloved Prophet stopped him. Hasbuka ya Bilal. Stop, Bilal. And the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked Sahaba. He asked them, can you count how many Muslims in Medina al-Munawwara? Can you count how many Muslims in Medina al-Munawwara that day? Then Sahaba radiyallahu anhum were proud, and they said, we are not many, Ya Rasulullah. We are too much. We are between 600 and 700. We are too much. 600 and 700. Then the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Wallahi la yujadu ahadun ya'budu Allah ala wajhi al-ardi ghayrakum. There's no one on earth worship Allah tabarak ta'ala except you. this handful, 600, spread the Islam till you receive it in South Africa. From Makkah al-Mukarramah till South Africa. 600, 700, just 700. Spread the Islam in the whole world. That, dear brothers and sisters, we need to ask ourselves, did we do our duty? You have many good things. We can't. In the UK, we can't. You won't find a place like this in the UK. You won't. You are here in very big ni'mah. But you don't realize that. You don't have any Islamophobia. You have, mashallah, wafra fil masadir, resources, mashallah, masajid. And yesterday I listened to the adhan, I heard the adhan, mashallah. The adhan was loudly. And the percentage of Muslim community just 2 to 3%. That's it. In the UK, maybe 5%. Here, just 3%. But you have this freedom. You have this chance to do our duty to Islam. So please, take care. Take this chance. We can't say, oh, we don't have time, I don't have money, I don't have knowledge. To spread Islam, to do da'wah, doesn't require money or ilm. You can't do that by phone while you are sitting at home. Last thing, I'd like to thank my old friend, Sheikh Ihsan. Sheikh Ihsan, mashallah, I met him in Doha around, I think, 10, 12 years ago. And alhamdulillah, tabarak ta'ala, Allah tabarak ta'ala linked between our hearts, and we became friends and keep contacting each other. And I'd like to thank you all for attending this symposium. Sheikh Imran, Ustadha Aisha, and everyone who made effort to organize, to arrange this great event. نسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يتقبل منا ومنكم صالح الأعمال وأن يجعلكم مباركين موفقين حيثما كنتم. And last thing, this is my social media. I'd like to, I'll be happy if we we will be in touch إن شاء الله تبارك وتعالى. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والحمد لله رب العالمين.
We say shukran to Prof. Belao. Now, Prof. Belao reminds us of the timeless truth that indeed, if you want to reform any community or society, start with education. On that note, I would like again to say shukran to Prof. Belao. Now, as we proceed with the program, I would like to call upon the first panel discussion, which will be on the role of Islamic education in leadership development, moderated by Dr. Nafisa Patel. Now, Dr. Nafisa Patel is one of the many kind women. She is a distinguished IPSA alumni and holds a PhD degree of religious studies from the University of Cape Town. Her research interests include Muslim childhoods and madrasa spaces in South Africa with a focus of gendered pedagogues. In addition to her academic pursuits, Dr. Patel serves on boards of a local masjid committee where she oversees programs for women and children. I'd like to call upon the first panel to the stage, moderated by Dr. Nafisa Patel. Please give them a round of applause.
billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran to Aisha. Prof. Beloo's keynote address helped to map out some of the broader historical landscapes of Islamic education, diagnosing some of the field's problems with the benefit of present-day hindsight and contemporary relevancy. So expanding on the considerations that was raised by the keynote speaker and delving deeper into the overarching theme of this symposium, this session, the first of 3 panel discussions, focuses on the role of Islamic education in leadership development. The notion of leadership is one of the more propagated concepts that has captured the attention and interest of many. Quite tellingly, at present, Amazon has over 60,000 published works on the topic of leadership, signifying not only a huge consumer audience, but also a proliferation of thought producers that include a wide spectrum of so-called leadership experts that range from academics to politicians, business and tech CEOs, sporting personalities, to Gen Z social media influencers. It is in this saturated marketplace of ideas and competing theories on leadership models, Muslim educators and teaching institutions need to carefully and skillfully navigate in this eclectic discursive terrain, and to consider the types of leadership building blocks that an Islamic educative framework in particular can provide. And it is to this terrain that we turn our attention to in this session. Each of the 3 panelists will consider the role of Islamic education in developing pathways for Muslim leadership from varying but interrelated perspectives. They present an array of thinking with tools and offer a wealth of insights drawn from the respective fields of expertise. Before I introduce our speakers, let me note the protocols for the session. Each speaker will have 20 minutes to present. Thereafter, we will open the floor for audience questions to the panel, and then I see that there is a coffee break scheduled immediately after the session, so I'm sure we will all stick to the 15 minutes allocated for Q&A, inshallah. So, the first of our speakers is Professor Aslam Fattah, who is a research professor in higher education transformation at Stellenbosch University. Professor Fattah has an extensive and influential body of academic work. He is a formidable thinker and an astute constructor of knowledges. We are indeed honored to engage with his ideas and to draw productively from his insights, inshallah. His talk, entitled Building Community Through Applied Muslim Epistemology, invites us to grapple critically and productively and practically with key educational concepts. And he sets out a framework for not only the application, but also the integration of knowledge domains as part of an Islamic education. I present to you. I give the floor to Professor Fattah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. In the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, most gracious, the dispenser of grace, all praise and blessings are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the nourisher, the cherisher and the sustainer of the universe, Professor Bilaal, Professor Sheikh Ihsan Talib, the ulama, academics, all attendees, all leaders of communities, I greet you with a greeting of peace, inshallah. My respected brothers and sisters, it is a privilege for me to speak to you today and I hope to be able to say one or two things that might stimulate some discussion with my fellow panelists, Professor Nuran and Dr. Fatima. Could I start? If someone can just help me, but I'll start in the meantime. To say that it's not moving. To say that, let me start by making a comment on politics. So we can all agree that democracy is in the firing line, and that, okay, so, okay. That democracy is in the firing line, as we are experiencing it currently and over the last while. That we are all, in South African context, experiencing disorientation. This disorientation is palpable. I won't say much more about that. But for me, two questions are crucial for establishing a reorientating platform. I believe that this reorientating platform won't come easily. We'll have to do intellectual work, we'll have to do community work, we will have to develop discourse. But the first question is whether the emerging ruling political governing pact, as it's currently unfolding, can allow us to pursue an accountable pro-poor development platform. Does the kind of GNU that's emerging allow us to do that? And the second question, more pertinently to my talk, is whether that kind of ruling platform would open space for the emergence of, note the word, the emergence of substantive democracy, not political democracy, not party political voting, substantive democracy. In other words, we give content to it, whether that kind of platform will emerge in which we in civil society can play a participative role in shaping community development, in shaping social development. We know that the first question considers the political possibility of the ruling pact, but the second question concerns the role of us, civil society, in building this democratic and just dispensation. I believe that part of the reorientation lies in the substantive quality we give in answering the second question, what is our role? Because for the purpose of this particular talk, I want to argue that Muslims have an extensive reservoir of intellectual resources in their turath, in their cultural and intellectual heritage, referred to by a professor this morning. But I want to argue that we have to put it to use. We have to apply it. Implicit in that proposition is that that might be exactly where the problem is. We haven't worked out how to apply it, contributing to the production of our disorientation currently. So I want to move this thing along, and therefore I will press the arrow here. Is that right? Okay. My title, Building Community Through Applied Muslim Epistemology. Epistemology is intellectual thought, knowledge, education, learning. That whole gamut of things. That is what the word epistemology means. Focuses on the intellectual orientation for overcoming our rigid, inflexible systems thinking and practice. I might add that Muslim epistemology is a reflection of a broader rigidity in our body politic and in our systemic environments. It's not particularly extraordinary to Muslims, but I'm speaking about the rigidity in Muslim society. My claim is that our thinking and practices are informed by various kinds of rigidities, various kinds of inflexible thinking, various kinds of systemic inflexibilities that currently prevent us from productively addressing societal circumstances. So kind of the wajib is to get to the societal circumstances. And to get to the societal circumstances, because we need to address it, means that we have to address our inflexibility, systemic, institutional, educational, and importantly for the purpose of this talk, intellectual. Because such rigidity stifles the responsiveness to our community needs. Therefore, what must be considered is the intellectual underpinnings, the epistemological underpinnings, the knowledge underpinnings of this inflexibility, and how such inflexibility or rigidity gets in the way of a productive community rebuilding role. For example, when young people face difficulties accessing jobs, we struggle to address their education, to college, to university, to jobs, pursuits. We haven't spanned the gaps. We haven't spanned it holistically. For families struggling with relational discord and breakdown, we have not been able to bring to the table psychosocial dimensions and religious spiritual dimensions in that joined up kind of a way where you're able to address the problems in the community and in our families. So this kind of community building requires, and this is the applied dimension, requires collaboration across various sectors, and it requires the pliability of adaptable methods. Therefore, an applied Muslim epistemology, applied intellectual thinking, which uses Islamic teachings and principles such as adl, justice, rahmah, compassion, would promote these interconnected practices concretely, not just in our words, not just in our discourse or in our language, but in our concrete everyday practices. Moving beyond this systemic rigidity in our knowledge approaches would involve questions concerning the ideal Muslim life, the ideal civic life, citizenship, laws and ethics. And the word for citizenship or Muslim citizenship, developed by contemporary scholars like Rashid Ghanousi, and particularly scholars in the Malaysian context, is al-muwatana, democratic citizenship. So people are in the world asking these important questions about our being as Muslims in the world and our contributions to the world. The literature tells us that Muslims have diverse approaches to these challenges. They use modern moral and ethical frameworks. So they combine the ethical and moral frameworks of the Turath, developed over 1400 years, and they put it into conversation with moral, ethical frameworks and establishes a rich conversation that produces a synthesis that moves us forward so that it guides us in our community work. Sheikh Ihsan will be speaking this afternoon about Maqasid al-Sharia, which is one way in the 14th century that offers a creative way to address these challenges for guiding the broader goals of Islam and informing innovative application of Sharia in various situations. Innovative applications applied to the particular context that we're in. My dearest brothers and sisters, applying the lessons of the past, of our Turath, to current problems span a wide array of disciplines. This is where the integratedness of disciplines come in. It's not just a question of Islamic sciences on the one hand, Western sciences on the other hand, geography, philosophy, and so on, but it is about integrating them in response to what? In response to a particular problematic. That you will find the intellectual conversation in the integrated disciplinary bases upon which you attempt to answer this question. Because it spans an array of disciplines, including Islamic law, Islamic theology, kalam, falsafa, environmental and bioethics, a very complex terrain of environmental and bioethics in which there is exceptionally interesting work done, and science and technology, economics, and digital platform and artificial intelligence, which was referred to in the previous speech. and applied Muslim epistemology and applied Muslim knowledge, for example, must confront what it means. Importantly, very question that we are all avoiding, but it stares us in the face, is what does it mean to be human in the age of planetary transitions? The planet is struggling to transit from fossil fuel to renewable energy, and the complex debate about that. How are we pursuing these transitions, which is a wajib? We have to transit to renewables because our planet is running out of resources. And how do we engage with artificial intelligence that have, to use an evocative metaphor, that have captured or colonized our bodies? The mere fact that I'm standing here with my cell phone in my pocket and my social media connectivity, and Sheikh indicating that he wants us to hit him up on social media after the talk, is an indication that algorithms have worked its way into our being. As a theological question, that must challenge us. How do we harness the theological debate? The debates of kalam, for example, the debates of qada and qadr, in relation to understanding what is the kind of the human that's unfolding, and where is the space for emergence? Where is the space for creativity in response to this? Or are we being overwhelmed by the machine, by digitality, and by social media? Our communities are divided by creed, politics, class, race, and there is a lack of political coherence. With that, I'm not saying that we have to speak in the same voice, but the conversation that we have to have has to be an orienting conversation that calls everyone in. Because an applied Muslim epistemological framework should therefore provide us valuable intellectual platforms and valuable insights and frames to counteract our community's fragmentation, our lack of cohesion, and increasing vulnerability. I want to use the word again. This is a necessity. This is a wajib. And so the time has come for us to come together and establish this knowledge, integrated knowledge conversation via the mobilizing of integrated forms of knowledge publics, everyone that brings something to the table in that horizontal manner, not in a vertical manner where the one is better than the other one or the one discipline is better than the other one. What is the best, what will inform the way we address our problems is to ask the question, what is the question? What is the question that confronts our human existence? And how shall we move forward in respect of this? I'm almost there, colleagues. Our Muslim epistemology, or Muslim knowledge for community building would involve fostering values like shura and khilafah, promoting participatory decision-making and equitable resource distribution. Our knowledge approaches should guide policy and practice to ensure fairness. It should develop flexible community structures. It should value diverse perspectives, as Sheikh has indicated. And we should create non-judgmental spaces where everyone feels valued. Because it's the better choices, the better options will emerge when we put our heads collectively together. Not when we shun certain heterodox opinions that we don't agree with from the table. Because it's in those heterodox, divergent opinions, if we open ourselves up and we listen, wherein lies the possibility of uncovering how we will move and how we will understand our role in the world. An applied epistemology promotes adaptive knowledge, not the knowledge that lays locked up in a book and which you regurgitate in an exam. But it's that ability to apply the thinking to the world and to problems in the world. This kind of legacy uses the Islamic perspective to address modern challenges and to foster community development. And I can give you examples. The Islamic Turath is vast, and there are many people that you can study in the Turath. I am particularly interested in two persons. Al-Farabi in the 9th and 10th century was a philosopher, but he married his philosophy, Islamic philosophy, with empiricism, laying the basis in Islamic sciences, for example, that then went on. And of course, as you mentioned, Ibn Khaldun. I'm a sociologist. The West doesn't know that Ibn Khaldun provided the foundations for sociology. Why? Because he lived in the age of the Black Death. He lived in the age where there were tremendous 50 million people dying in Europe and North Africa, and tremendous changes in the world that he lived in. And he was a student of trying to understand those changes, trying to understand the sociological dynamics that happen when a society society lives through cataclysmic events and have to adapt and reorder itself in order to survive. There is much that we can learn from that particular example. Finally, my dear colleagues, I'm overstaying my welcome here. My chair is not telling me how many minutes I have. And so I will just give you a couple of examples of these practical examples of how we can take this applied, integrated knowledge, Muslim knowledge, into project work. But remember, these examples, in the center of them is epistemology, is intellectual work, and the application of the intellectual work, and bringing together those publics, those sets of people who will allow us to understand the problems. It is also problem-driven. So let me say that some of these are, I think, what is important is that we have to establish think tanks that allow us in a targeted way, not to respond to the entire world, but to respond to targeted problems. So what are those problems? And the think tank will bring together the expertise and the community participation to thinking through and developing discourse about those problems. Secondly, for example, establishing business development projects on basis of Islamic ethical principles, and some of them are already around. To launch eco-sustainability and renewable energy initiatives. That is an enormous gap in our community that we have to establish on this applied methodological basis. To set up critical digital and social media literacy initiatives for young people, something that I'm very particularly interested in, and I'm particularly leading a small little project with a couple of young people in this, and that is media use and digital use. How does it affect our beingness and how do we respond? And for example, in the aesthetic realm, to design art programs. Art speaks to the head and the heart, the cognition and the spirit. It evokes a particular sense of beauty and beingness in the world. It provides us an aesthetic basis to get to know the other, to move away from ourselves and into the spaces of the other. It builds the imagination. And the final one is something that I'm also involved with in a very small scale with Raghib Najjar, in a student support program, is to develop programs to support youth and students when they transit from school to college, to university, to the world of work. And here, applied Muslim epistemology allows these kids to develop the skills to navigate those transitions, to be supported in respect of those transitions, because young people and kids who face unemployment and unemployability as is unable to span the gaps. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you to Professor Fatah for very eloquently mapping out a snapshot of what an integrated framework of teaching, learning, living, being, and becoming a Muslim leader might entail. The term ecologies of knowledge, which you often refer to in your own writings, I find is especially useful to help capture the saliency of thinking beyond rigidness and allowing space to creatively learn and to integrate and to lead. I think this is important, not only so that we as Muslims can fit within the contours of our collective futures, but also to be the shapers of those contours. In keeping with this notion of creatively navigating the Islamic educational landscape and identifying the building blocks that help develop Muslim thought leaders who are able to broaden and expand, not constrict and limit, our next speaker will share what that process entails from an Islamic legal perspective. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Advocate Fatima Essop and mention some of her many accolades, alhamdulillah. After obtaining her law degree From UCT in 1994, Fatima practiced as a human rights attorney and then as an advocate of the Cape Bar in various areas of the law, including constitutional law and Muslim family law. In 2016, she graduated with a BA in Islamic Studies from IPSA, alhamdulillah, and went on to do her doctorate at UCT, focusing on the intersection between Islamic law of inheritance and South African law of inheritance. Whilst doing her PhD, she lectured at UCT's law faculty. In 2022, she graduated with her PhD and went on to do a one-year fellowship at Harvard Law School in the program of Law and Society in the Muslim World, where she published in the area of Muslim family law. Fatima and her husband also founded and managed Timbuktu Books, one of Cape Town's leading Islamic bookstores. She has been a murid of the Naqshbandi Tariqa for over 25 years and was a chairperson of the Naqshbandi South Africa's women's wing, An-Nisa, which sought to empower women through knowledge and spirituality. She is currently a FEMAC, accredited family law mediator and independent researcher, whose research interests include social legal studies, legal pluralism, and the practice of Muslim family law in constitutional democracies. And with that list of impressive credentials and experience, we are indeed most honored to have her present her thoughts on the imperative of including empirical research in Islamic tertiary curricula. I present to you Dr. Fatima.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. Assalamu alaikum, Professor Belao, to our respected shuyukh and members of the audience. It's a great privilege for me to be speaking on such an esteemed panel, and I'd like to thank Sheikh Ihsan and IPSA for inviting me. I'm an alumni of IPSA, so it's a real honor to return to be able to present at this Wasatiyyah Symposium. I sent through my PowerPoint, so I'm just hoping that they're able to locate it. And I'm not sure if in terms of protocol, Sheikh Ihsan, if I should wait for that to come through or should we move on to the next speaker? What would you suggest? Sorry? Come, Nuran, come see. Is yours Paradigms of Identity? Yep, is that yours? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't do that.
No, send it to you. Did you find a chair? Sorry? I sent it to Sheikh Ihsan and Sheikh Fakhruddin. Okay.
Oh, okay. Are we going to do Fatima? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Imam, for the technical glitch here. We're just waiting for to sort out. Okay. Can you just give us a few minutes while we sort out? We try to find Dr. Fatima's presentation. Yeah. So while we wait, and not to waste our time, we've had opportunity to listen to Professor Fattar in the meanwhile, and if there are any questions that we would like to pose, I'm sure Professor Fattar would be happy to engage us, and I'll be happy to take it. Anybody has any questions? I think we have roaming mics around, and we also have an online platform, so if there's any questions, we could also feel that they'll put it up on screen, I think. Is there anybody? Yes?
Assalamu alaikum. Once again, thanks, Aslam, for sort of stimulating our thinking. And I'm just wondering, at some point you basically mentioned that we basically propose certain ideas, but we seem to get stuck in terms of applying. So I'm just asking myself, to what extent, at what point, and are there perhaps institutions that you are familiar with that have transitioned from that thinking platform to an application platform? Have there been any? Are there any? Are there potential ones that that do come to mind?
Fadal, shukran, Professor Mohammed Harun. Indeed, yes, this is the scholarly project that I'm currently scoping. So I'm very alert to where this kind of work is currently happening in the world. So I'm currently on sabbatical, courtesy of my HOD, and I'm traveling the world to find examples of these. And they have emerged. We can have a conversation about that. And there are also examples in our own environments that are emerging. These examples are often partial. The argument that I'm making is that they have to be imbued with a much more conscious applied epistemological platform to activate it to the next level. And so I can mention a number of examples. I did try to make some practical categories there for those examples. So they are there. My argument today is that they have to be activated with an applied Islamic epistemological frame as well. Shukran.
I think we have another question on the other side.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Dr. Ikram Ali. I'm a forensic pathologist at UCT, so please, although an IPSA graduate as well. So I just want to know, Prof, you mentioned the rigidity. I'm trying to picture this. I mean, the percentage of rigidity versus non-rigidity. Because, I mean, you know, as Muslims, we face problems around the world, either internalized or externalized. So I'm thinking, how big is this rigidity that it's not overcome over hundreds of years yet? I mean, you know, has somebody applied some form of number or some form of percentage to that rigidity versus non-rigidity?
So the way in which I think of rigidity is that it is a conceptual organizer for my ability to understand various practices. So it is not as if you are entirely rigid or entirely flexible, but it is my ability to understand that when you establish your practices in the world, to what extent are you open to the possibility of bringing in the relevant publics to the problem, of taking the problem to the ground, and bringing the various intellectual resources that will enrich it to the ground. So if you have a particular problem in front of you, and that problem expresses itself in a particular way, you can understand how rigid the response to that problem is and how to open it up. Right? So it is a generic way of speaking about how you encounter the response to a problem and how you will be able to open those problems up to the infusement of a more flexible orientation. There's a couple of principles for moving beyond rigidity. One is horizontalizing the question. What I mean by that is it's not just an expert's question. It's also a question about community and participation. Two, it's about bringing the expertise in and establishing a conversation that values the experts without valorizing the experts, in other words, making them dominant. And then to develop a literacy that would allow us to have a conversation of mutual understanding that allows us to move the problem forward from small to big. If you were to ask me how rigidity currently sits in the conceptual universe in relation to, I think it is a massive problem. The world is just deeply complicated, and we are responding to that world out of our various preordained rigidities. And I think we have to unlock that. It is planetary sustainability as well as digital and artificial intelligence have now confounded the way in which our practices work. And the need to become flexible in response to that is now palpable.
Can I continue one more question?
Can I ask you to maybe hold on to your thought?
The presentation is...
Yeah, we would like to continue, and we will have a segment after all three panelists have, so we can actually continue, so you can hold your thought and expand. And I think Professor Fattah has given us much to hold on to, so I think we will be able to engage them and the other panelists. So, as per my earlier introduction, I apologize for to Dr. Fatima. Fatima, the platform is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. So, shukran, and I'm sorry about that. I did send my slides through yesterday, so I'm not sure what happened. In any event, as indicated, my topic is about evidence-based Islamic scholarship and the imperative of including empirical research in Islamic tertiary curricula. And by empirical research, I basically mean going out into communities and gathering data on what exactly are the practices and experiences of people in the actual communities. And so why did I choose this particular topic? Well, I felt because, and why do I think it's important that this evidence-based research and empirical research is included in tertiary, Islamic studies tertiary curricula? Well, because I think it's the way possibly to bridge the gap between what is the theory of Islamic law and the lived reality of Islamic law. I think that by engaging in empirical research, we potentially narrow that particular gap. And I think both previous speakers have alluded to to this issue of not being in touch with what contemporary realities are within our societies. And so, for instance, I thought I'd give some examples from our own field research on certain areas of Muslim family law. And of course, this can apply to various areas of law, environmental law, finance law, where you basically highlight what is the gap between what the theory of law says and what's happening on the ground. And so, for instance, we can all agree, for instance, that all the madhab are in agreement that in a marriage, the husband is responsible to nafaka or maintain the wife and his children, right? That's it, because we always hear that Islam came about and brought about all these rights for women and liberated women. And we often told that, in fact, a Muslim woman never has to work because her husband has to nafaka her and is responsible for maintaining her. I did empirical research at the MJC where I observed various fasakh and divorce proceedings, and what the outcome of that empirical research demonstrated was of the 77% of the women who applied for a fasakh, 77% of those women cited the fact that they wanted a fasakh because their husbands just didn't nafaka them. right? So, and then of that sample, 20% cited the fact that not only the husbands didn't nafaka them, their husbands just abandoned them and their children. So here we have the law saying, well, actually in Islamic law, a husband is supposed to nafaka and maintain his wife, but the reality is very different on the ground within our community. And what was very interesting for me, because I come from a legal background, and it's been quite interesting moving into the, like Professor says, in the sociology realm, is to find out some of the reasons. Like I had no idea that drug use and alcohol use was so high within the Muslim Cape Town community. It was quite astonishing. And that came about from interviewing people at the councillors and various people passing through the MJC. Another example is in Islamic divorce law, right? When I was at IPSA and I did Sheikh Tawfa's course, I was so amazed at all these rights that Islam gave women in divorce. In fact, he told us about something I didn't know about talaq tafweed, right? And although it's considered an acceptable condition to put into your contract at the time of marriage, in South Africa, very few women actually insist on the delegated divorce when they conclude their marriage contract. Their father will stipulate a dowry, but the woman will never say, and I want a delegated divorce as well, right? So that's not common in South Africa, even though it's an accepted Islamic principle. Similarly, the khula. Khula is an accepted form of divorce, whether it's conditional or unconditional. For those who don't know, khula is a no-fault divorce, where the woman can go and obtain a divorce based on the fact that she doesn't love her husband anymore. It's not because he doesn't nafaka, on condition that she returns her mahar. Right? Of all those divorces I observed at the MJC, there was only one khula that took place. And that's because just before that, I asked the Imam, don't you consider khula as a form of divorce? And suddenly in the next case that came before him, he granted the khula. The couple was so confused. They said, what's a khula? Right? And the Imam says, it's basically where you pay to get out of the marriage. And she says, oh, well, I might as well pay to get out. I've paid for everything else. Right? She says in the session. So, and then of course he told her, and he was like, what? So what does this mean? So he says, pay 50 rand and he'll give you a talaq. She said, okay, fine. I'll give him 50 rand it was a symbolic amount, right? And anyway, in Islamic wills, for instance, in theory, Islamic law says, when people draw up the Islamic, this is very common in Cape Town, they say in their will, my executor is to settle any kafara for outstanding salah or for any oath I may have made. So any outstanding debts to God is what they refer to it. Right? You see this very often in Islamic will. In practice, it's very impractical. It's very noble to say, pay up all my salahs. And who's keeping track of all the salahs you missed? Right? But this is what happens in practice when you go out and you find that actually, and I see Mr. What's name? I'm sure you know there's an attorney in the audience. Our people include this. At most, maybe a hajj is what gets paid, but in reality, unless you're keeping a book, which apparently people in Durban and Joburg sometimes do, they keep a diary of all their salahs and zakahs, it's very difficult for your executor. And in fact, the MJC just ignores it anyway when they do their distribution certificate. Another example is in law of inheritance, a wife is entitled to 1/8 if the husband has children. A court, of course, if he has no children. The assumption here is that the son will look after the mother when the father passes away. But when you go into the community, how many times do you find that this is not actually the case? The sons get the major shareholding in the house. They might have still had looked after their mother, but now they have a wife. Why must we keep the house? Sell it. Your mommy can find somewhere else to stay. Right? So now the mother is saddled with only 1/8. She has no security of tenure. The MJC has given a fatwa to say Yusuf Raksa haram in a will, right? And so what does that leave? Where does that leave the mother? We won't know this until we go into the community and we do empirical research. So what I've demonstrated is the gap, right? There's the theory of law and what's actually happening in society. We teach our students this. I love this tree. This is a tree I created with the help of my son, Mohammed. So this is what we teach our students at IPSA, right? And at all these Islamic institutions. This is the tree of Islamic law. As you know, at the bottom, the roots are the Quran and the Sunnah, the primary sources. right? And then you have the sciences of the Quran, tafsir Quran, you have the hadith sciences, which is the hadith sahih collections, you have the biographies of the narrators, the science of hadith, mustalah al-hadith, and then as my trunk, I have usul al-fiqh, which are the methodologies you use to extract the rulings from the primary sources. What do you have here? You have qiyas, you have ijma, consensus, you have companions' opinions, the consensus of the companions of Medina. You have juristic preference, public interest, presumption of continuity, blocking asad darai, blocking the means, and custom or urf. Right? And from this, you then have the branches, which are the substantive fiqh rulings. And that could be fiqh rulings, whether it's family law, whether it's fiqh of minorities, whether it's fiqh of finances. These are all the substantive laws. And of course, you use the process of ijtihad. Use the process of ijtihad to get from your roots to your trunk, and ijtihad to get from your trunk to your roots to come out with your final substantive rulings. And ideally, what you're doing is you apply maqasid sharia. You're looking at principles of justice, mercy, when you're going through all these processes, and you're looking at the 5 maqasid sharia that we regard as the primary maqasid sharia. So these are what we are generally taught. What I'm saying is that through the process of teaching students and including empirical research in the curricula, we will contribute to enriching the process of ijtihad. And why do I say that? Because first of all, we say in the tree here, you'll see custom, urf is one of the methodologies. How do you know what's your urf in your community? How do you know what's your custom? Unless you go out into your community and find out what is actually happening within the community. What is happening to that wife who's only getting 1/8? Why are men not nafakaing their wives? Oh, we have a drug and alcohol problem. This is something I discovered by doing empirical research. So this is important. Empirical research assists in determining the urf, what is the custom. It also helps you determine what is in the public interest, maslaha mursala. How do you know what's in the public interest unless you know what's happening in the community, where are the needs, where are the gaps, and then you use your various methodologies and the process of ijtihad, and you come up with rulings that are applicable to your particular context, to your contemporary context. And you might ask, is this something new, this notion of empirical research in the Islamic legal system? No, it's not. If you look at the fiqh of haid, there are the ulama can back me out on this. There are very few Quranic verses or hadith that deals with haid, and yet you have chapters in fiqh books on the fiqh of haid, right? On istihada, what's the amount of days to determine what's the shortest haid, what's the longest haid, what's the istihada, what's nifas. Each madhab had a different ruling. Why did they have that different ruling in the absence of revelatory texts? Without primary text. Well, there's an example, for instance, where Salama said, radiallahu anha came to the Prophet ﷺ, said this woman was bleeding all the time. When does a haid start and end? The Prophet ﷺ told her, look at her period cycle before she had this particular condition where she was afflicted, and based on that cycle, that's when a haid ends. Everything after that is istihada. If that isn't evidence-based or empirical research, then I don't know what is. And this is what the various Imam Shafi, they would look at the custom. What's the custom of the woman in their particular area? How long is the haid? How long is nifas? And that's how they developed the fiqh of haid. So it's not something new. And I was going to do a live survey, for instance, to show you, given an example of empirical research in action. So, for instance, we are told Islamic law is very liberating of women, which it is. And then we are told, for instance, a woman doesn't have to, when she breastfeeds her baby, she can get paid for that breastfeeding, right? Isn't that what we are always told? And when she works, she doesn't have to do housework. Her husband has to pay her. He has to pay her. She can ask to be paid. Now, I want to ask the women in the audience, whoever has breastfed, who of you have charged for your breastfeeding of your babies? Or whose husbands have paid them? Show of hands. I have 3 sons. I breastfed them from 19 months to 22 months. I never got paid to this day for breastfeeding my boys. Right? Similarly, I want to ask husbands, in your will, have you stipulated, yes, my wife didn't have to do any of the caregiving, houseworking, and because of that, I'm not only going to give her 1/8, I consider it a debt against my state, I will give her this. In fact, I'm giving her the house for all the years of housework. How many of you men have done that? Right? That's, mashallah, mashallah. There we have empirical is what percent is that? 1% of the crowd can say they actually have stipulated that in their will. So that's why it's important to actually see what is actually happening within the community. And I argue that the reason that empirical research is important is because it serves as a compass. It guides the adaptation of Islamic law to evolving societal realities. When you look at what's happening on the ground, you're able to bridge the gap, to narrow the gap. It enables Islamic legal scholars to navigate the interplay between tradition, we have a very rich tradition, and modernity. Because this is the time, this is both previous speakers spoke about, we have to look at our context right here, right now, and what's applicable to us. And this doesn't only mean in Muslim family law. I'm talking about Islamic finance too, and there we're quite good at adapting, right? Similarly with environmental law, there are so many issues. How do we bridge the gap between what the theory of law says and what's happening on the ground? It also results in evidence-based decision making. Right? If you teach your scholars to do empirical research, it empowers them to critically engage with legal issues, and they are able to discern the underlying social, cultural dynamics that actually shape legal phenomena within the community. It also fosters greater transparency, accountability, and legitimacy within the realm of Islamic law, and enhances the trust of the public in legal institutions and rulings, because they know you've come to us, you've identified what the issues are, and you've adapted your fatwa to address the actual issues that we face. It also mitigates the risk of legal rulings being divorced from societal realities. It also bridges that gap between it transcends cultural boundaries, sorry. So basically when you do empirical research, it also allows cross-cultural dialogue and mutual understanding. And what do I mean by this? Well, how does one actually do that? Well, by examining legal phenomena within diverse cultural and geographical communities, you actually gain valuable insights into the university of the certain legal principles that we apply, but also the diversity of their application. And by example here, I'd like to cite, for instance, in South Africa, we have a growing revert African Muslim community. Every other week, Imam Yasin of Drifsanskal brings so many people into Islam. How do we navigate this space? And there's so little research on, for instance, cross-cultural Islamic law and African customary law. How do you apply mahar and labola? How do you navigate the space between African customary law and Islamic law? What about the rules of Islamic inheritance versus primogeniture? In African customary law, the eldest son gets everything. How do you now do new reverts? How do you navigate the space between what the African culture says and what Islamic law says? We have no research on this particular area, this area. If any students are interested, I think that's a fantastic PhD. Right? Also, as Prof said, it engenders this whole symbiotic relation between the Islamic legal sciences and other diverse academic sciences, for instance, sociology, psychology, anthropology, and other empirical disciplines. It's very important that we don't teach our students in a vacuum, and I think Prof said it as well. You can't be removed from the real world out there. My background is in in South African law. Then I went on to study Islamic law. When I started moving into the area of sociology, it just opened up a whole new world for me, right? This is similarly with psychology. If you speak to a woman, why does that woman stay in an abusive marriage for 15 years, right? Despite the fact that she comes there to you and she's abused, why? You need to understand psychology. You need to understand narcissists. You need to understand. Our students are ill-equipped. They don't understand psychology. They don't understand. If you have an imam mediating a dispute in a divorce, he doesn't understand psychology. He's not been trained in psychology or sociology. How can he understand what the issues are, right? So empirical research is important to kind of working in an interdisciplinary way. And that allows students to gain multifaceted understandings of legal phenomena within the Islamic context. So in conclusion, I want to say that by embracing the empirical methodologies, students and scholars of Islamic law will enhance their analytical acumen, promote evidence-based decision-making, and they will foster a deeper understanding of the social implications of their legal rulings. Furthermore, it will serve as a catalyst for innovation within Islamic legal studies, enabling the adaptation of Islamic law to contemporary realities, while at the same time upholding the principles of justice, compassion, and equity, which is the maqasid al-sharia that Sheikh Ihsan spoke about. And as custodians of Islamic tradition, it's incumbent upon our Islamic tertiary institutions to embrace empirical research as a cornerstone of legal education, thereby nurturing a new generation of jurists equipped to navigate the complex intersection of tradition and modernity with wisdom, integrity, and compassion. Shukran wa alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Fatima, for a really impassioned and pertinent presentation. I think Dr. Fatima highlights the fact that context matters, not only in understanding the application of the law, but essentially it extends to how we understand the concept of tradition in itself. I think it's important to also point out, and often we use labels to dismiss discussions, important discussions that I think Dr. Fatima has brought up. We use labels such as modernist, feminist, whatever, without recognizing the intellectual labors that went into some of the things that we do. So the work, so not only empirical, but also extend our borders without dismissing. There is a huge body of work that has been conducted by female scholars, maybe not, we assume not grounded in Islamic imperatives, without really engaging the work. So I encourage us to, not doubting my own work or my own field of study, but actually we should broaden our horizons to include those things. So thank you, Dr. Fatima. I think you've really given us much very practical ideas to work with, and I'm sure everyone will have lots of questions for you in the next section. The final speaker for the session is Professor Nuran Davids, who is a professor of philosophy of education and the chair in the Department of Education Policy Studies in the Faculty of Education at Stellenbosch University. Her research interests includes philosophy of higher education, democratic citizenship, education, and Islamic philosophy of education. Professor Nuran's presentation is entitled Islamic Paradigms of Identity and Ethical Leadership. And she shares with us her insights from her extensive research work and ethical and critical engagements at the intersecting domains of education, the convergences of the political, the global, the religious, the economic, and the ethical. We are most honored to engage and draw from her toolkit of provocative thought. I give to you, Professor Nuran. Thank you. I am not
found it later on the first one.
That's a business.
On earlier on, so it should still be here.
Can you find it on there?
Okay. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum to everybody. Shukran so much for inviting me to participate in this symposium. It's an honor to be here. And I would like to engage you in the following topic. I've been asked to look at the issue of leadership. This is something which is very critical to my own research work. I have done extensive work in Islamic philosophy of education, and I've also worked on the issues of identity and leadership. And so for me, this is really a nice way, I think, to contribute to the symposium. So the concern that I'm going to look at, you don't have to read the whole thing, is the fact that as Muslims in a very strange world right now, we are experiencing increased Islamophobia. We are experiencing increasing marginalization and exclusion, and might I add, ethnic cleansing as well as genocide. These are the realities under which our Muslim Ummah live across the world. And I want to just take us through that. And then I want to look at, so after looking at the issues at hand in both so-called liberal democracies and more problematically in Muslim majority countries, I want to look at possible solutions. So it's not going to be all doom and gloom. So let's start. So typically when we talk about the tensions that we encounter in liberal democracies, we mistakenly think it all started with 9/11. And yes, the world certainly changed post 9/11. Suddenly you would have found yourself under greater scrutiny if you went through an airport. Suddenly there was increased surveillance, particularly in the US and the UK. And generally there was a sense of suspicion when it came to Muslims. But I want to stress that whatever happened after 9/11 did not start with 9/11. The concerns and the bolstering of Islamophobia emanates from the big project of colonialism. It has always been a part of colonialism to dismiss Islam. Islam presents a particular kind of problem, and that problem is that it refuses to commit to a Western way of life, and hence this incredible need to shut it down at any cost. And the situation that we see in Gaza at the moment is a powerful symbol that should actually force us to reflect collectively on what this means for us as Muslims and how we got to this point in the first place. So we've had many things happen. I just want to give you an oversight. In terms of liberal democracies, we can cite, for example, the issues in France, who have been very forthright in the regulation of hijab, for example. Public servants, if you're a teacher in a public school, I would have to remove my hijab in order to teach in a school. They have introduced an anti-separatism bill, which basically is a means, they call it a means of foregrounding national identity, but actually what they're trying to do is to shut down Islamic identity in terms of home-based schools, in terms of madaris, and they want you to identify as French and not as Muslim. And then we also see this thing called the neutrality principle. Again, it's about the hijab. Do not wear anything which overtly reveals anything about your religious identity. And they say, no, we're applying it uniformly across all faiths. So we're also looking at big crosses, for example. But we all know that wearing a cross around your neck and wearing a scarf are entirely two different practices. Okay, the one is an obligation, the other one is not. So there are all these tensions that's happening in liberal democracies. And I want to highlight, because this is something which is primary to my research as well, is that in the midst of Islamophobia, it is Muslim women who are most confronted by it. Right? It's easy enough for Muslim men to navigate through public sphere in a way that Muslim women are not able to do. And unfortunately, we now differentiate between hijab-wearing Muslim women and non-hijab-wearing Muslim women, right? And my own experiences have taught me that in order to get through a particular space sometimes, do not reveal that you are Muslim. And this tells you, very paradoxically, that in liberal democracies that claim to be pluralist and multicultural and recognize the rights of all people to exercise who they are and the freedom of religion, it's exactly in those societies where you are going to find a clamping down. And to the professor's point earlier on about Islamophobia, I am sorry to say it has made its way to South African shores already. So we do have a problem. The other thing about Muslim women's bodies, which has been increasingly policed and regulated, is that we occupy a paradox. On the one hand, we are being told we want to liberate you from your backwardness, so remove the scarf. And on the other hand, they tell us you are a threat to our way of life. So we're not quite sure what we are. Are we a victim of patriarchy and oppression and backwardness, or are we a threat? But this is the paradox under which Muslim women, and personally, again, as a personal reflection on the research to which Fatima refers, we have endless bodies of research of the experiences of Muslim women, particularly in universities, particularly in public spaces where it's becoming more and more difficult to hold on to that identity without being harassed. At a global scale, at a bigger scale, moving from the individual to the collective now, and I want to stress, this is just a handful. This is by far, I cannot list all the atrocities. We're going to be here for the day if I have to do that. So we know for a fact, let me start with Palestine, or those listed last. The issue of Palestine has been a long time coming, and for a very long time, it's been about ethnic cleansing and genocide, right? Despite what the world would like us to believe. That is the fact of the situation. Now, Palestine occupies a particular place in the hearts of South Africa, so we probably know a lot more about Palestine than what we do about the Uyghurs, for example, who since 2017 have been arrested and put into what's called, this is an area in northwest China, where if you are Muslim, you are in serious trouble, because you'll be put into political re-education camps. Muslim women are forced to have sterilization. Men are prohibited from having any beards. This is the reality, and there are people sitting in jails, and I'm not talking a handful, millions of people are subjected to daily persecution simply because they are Muslim. We see a similar pattern play out in Rohingya, again, where the Myanmar armed forces have been targeting Muslim societies and communities since 2016. These people are displaced. Currently, they constitute such a large amount of people. They are considered to be the largest group of stateless people in the world. Now, what does that mean? Think about how important your ID book is to you. Think about how important your passport is to you in order to move. Think about how you need those documents to get work. For anything, open a bank account, buy a house, get married. If you don't have legitimacy as a citizen, you are immobilized. And that's exactly what's happened here. We also know, and particularly under the leadership of this, let me keep my thoughts to myself, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he has embarked on a systematic massacre of Muslims in India. And here we have the world's biggest so-called minority group of over 200 million people sitting in that area who are being massacred for no other reason than being Muslim. I highlight this to you to give you an idea. So when we talk about Islam being in crisis, it's not an exaggeration, okay? And then to the point early on that Professor made in terms of the fact 700 Sahaba spread the message. And this is where it is right now, all over the world, including in Cape Town. But as a collective ummah, we are in trouble. We are under siege. Now, if we move into, I've spoken to you about liberal democracies, I've spoken to you what's happening elsewhere. And so you might think, oh, well, maybe I'm better off in a Muslim majority society. Yeah, possibly, if you're going to stay indoors. Muslims in Iran, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, our theological home, I might add, it's basically led by a bunch of tyrants. And now we have to ask the question, so why do we send our shuyukh there to go and study? What are we doing? Why is Wahhabism a part of our ideology in this society? Do we ask these questions? They get invited over, they're paid for, so it's all very easy. But what are we doing? What kind of leaders are we developing when we send our young people there and they come back? And so this is an important point. So we have serious, we can point all our fingers at the West, and rightfully so. But boy, oh boy, we aren't any better. In fact, we should be more ashamed, because we claim to have gotten the message of the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We claim the Quran as our constitution. This is what we say. It's not evident in these societies. And I want to single out the murder of Mahsa Amin, who was murdered. She didn't die of a heart attack or health conditions. For those of you who don't know, she was an Iranian young woman, I think 21, 22 at the time, who wasn't wearing a scarf. And she got arrested and she was killed for it. Where in Islam, where in the Seerah Have you ever seen the Prophet ﷺ speak to somebody about not wearing a hijab or killing her for not wearing one? So we are so far removed from what our paradigms are actually asking of us. Yemen, same thing. Yemenis are being slaughtered as I'm speaking to you. Right? By whom? They're Saudi brothers. That's who's killing them. So we have extreme problems. And the reason why I'm highlighting this, because I get annoyed when we continually point our fingers at the West. They doing this to us. We have to take some responsibility for why we are where we are as a global ummah. Now, the silence for me, I've just done some work on this because I was struck by it. Again, to the Palestinian issue. Lots of universities across the world, thankfully in Western societies, in South Africa, unfortunately not my own so much, have come out and really stood up against the genocide that is happening in Gaza right now. But, as my research has found, the voices from universities in Muslim societies have been mute. Now, there are reasons for that, which I think I've spoken to about before. If you're living in a tyrannical society where you could be arrested for speaking the way I am right now, I would be arrested in another society, I promise you. Okay? Like at the door. So, if you're in that kind of society, it becomes very hard for you to speak out. We saw a bit of a spark a good few years ago with the Arab Spring, right? Where there was a real determination to push back. But of course, we know it didn't actually lead to much. So we do have a problem, and the other speakers have alluded to that already. In that, and this is from Roshanani Hashim, and she's at the Islamic University of Malaysia. And she says that Muslim universities fail to produce graduates who can articulate today's pressing issues of democracy, civil society, human rights, gender, pluralism, language, the whole gamut. They cannot speak about these things. They don't know how to interact with difference. They don't know how to think critically. They don't know how to engage in global debates. And now to bring it home to us, and this, again, I'm treading on very thin ice, I know. Where we in this amazing auditorium, this is a so-called Islamic school, what kind of child are we producing here? We have so many of these schools popping up. We have so many hifz schools. We have so many kids sitting in hifz schools all day long, memorizing, rote learning, memorizing, rote learning. Can the child think? Can the child read? Can the child write? How prepared is the child to be a young adult? Right? So we have to find a way to navigate this and to unpack this. And I know it makes people uncomfortable, but at some point we have to start looking at what are we teaching our young people at our madaris and at our so-called Islamic-based schools. What is happening? What is different about the child who comes out of Islamia, for example? Right? What can he give us that another child cannot? These are important challenges for us to confront. Now, what is going on? Why? And I don't want to focus on liberal democracies. I want to focus on my own and look at Muslim majority countries, right? Why is there this stagnation in terms of education? Why is there this fear? Why is there no academic freedom? Why, if you compare the state, Al-Qarawiyyin, I had the great privilege of spending time there last year, alhamdulillah. The most amazing experience. And then you get brought in and you go into these archives. And again, I was privileged to go and spend time in the archives. And then you get hit by the reality, Ya Allah, the scholarship that our ulama and our scholars and our philosophers historically known under the Islamic Golden Age, the contributions they made were immense. These people weren't just academics or teachers or philosophers, they were polymaths. They were able to adapt and navigate all kinds of disciplines. And look at our state now. What has happened? What has happened to us? And unfortunately, when we look at any institution, we look at a school, we look at the home, we say the man is the head of the house. So, while if the house is dysfunctional and the family is dysfunctional, we should look to the man, isn't it? We don't, or we look to the mother often. We should say, you were supposed to rear the children, right? That's, anyway, it's another thing. But when we look at a dysfunctionality of any system or any center or any institution or a country, like South Africa right now, we have to look to the leadership. You want the leadership? You like the title? Okay, take it. Now let's see what you're going to do with it. And people want it for all the wrong reasons, not understanding that with leadership comes responsibility. Right? With leadership comes accountability. And this is something that we, in South Africa, in Cape Town, we struggle with those concepts. We can talk about it on the mimbar, but don't ask me what I'm doing. Okay? So these are important things. So what we see, I've sketched to you the geographical context, and the kinds of political leadership that we have is one of economic backwardness, political instability, poverty, poor education. The Taliban on the other end of the world, who has this crazy idea that women should not be educated, my opinion, a complete violation of what the Quran says. Yet they're in charge. We have political degradation, and of course, amidst this, there's this perpetuation of inequality and injustice. And even in the so-called wealthy Arab countries, the wealth to which is referred does not filter down to the person in the street. There are wide disparities between the ruling class and the real person in the road. Right? So we have a catastrophe in terms of that. All of this, the geographical context, the deficit leadership, makes us vulnerable as an ummah. And so when we are faced with an deranged American president declaring war and sending arms to annihilate people, we can't even respond as a collective. That's how fractured we are. We stand by in little fragmented groups because we have let go of the rope which should have held us together. Okay? So let's talk about leadership. Now, leadership is complex. It's entirely context-bound. Okay? The type of leadership that's going to be required at an Islamic-based school will be different than the one we require at Stellenbosch University where I work. In the same way, the MJC has a particular kind of leadership which might be different from the other ulamas across South Africa. Right? So different leaderships play out differently. But what we need to understand, if we're going to get this right, is, and there are different theories on leadership, different leadership styles. Some people believe you're born a leader, right? Some people think you have to, some people say, well, if I was the Imam of the mosque, then my son must become the next Imam of the mosque. And then in turn, his son must become the next Imam of the mosque, right? Again, can we look at the Sunnah and can we find that example, please? Because as far as I understand the seerah, when the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam knew his death was forthcoming, he did not look at his family as the next leader. He looked at who was the best person for the job, who was the most capable. So leadership is about relationships and influence, not coercion that you find in Muslim majority countries. Leadership has to do with broader social and cultural understandings. I'm pressurized for time. In Islam, we draw on the foundational paradigms when we talk about leadership. And this pretty much applies to absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, any decision making that you have to do in your life. For me, there's the answer. What does our Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam say in this instance? What does the Quran say? So, according to the Quran itself, the Quran is able to transcend centuries. It's able to transcend cultures. It's a universalist language. What does that mean? That means that the exact kind of leadership that we saw in our Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam can find its place here in a modern century. Why? Because ultimately, leadership has a twofold process. One, to obey the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's embodied in the Quran, and two, to fulfill the rights of all in society. If I understand that, on the one hand, I have to make sure I enact my trust, the amana I've taken on as a leader, and I know I'm going to be accountable year and more importantly in the year after. So I accept that. And on the other hand, I accept the fact I'm accountable to you. Why? Because what we look at is this amana. There's a trust. So when Cyril Ramaphosa says, my time is up. When Cyril Ramaphosa says that he wants to lead us again, he's telling us, you can trust me to do this. Okay? Now that's another discussion. So there is, however, in Islam, the idea of a contract. Just bear with time, please. I'm tying up now. There is with Islam, the idea of contract sits very squarely. Right? Islam is very emphatic on having things in writing. Agreements. Nikah, what are the conditions? Right? Stipulate any loaning of money, agreement. The same thing pertains to leadership. Leaders must be knowledgeable and qualified. It's not about whether I like you or not. Are you the best person for the job or not? What qualifications do you have? What knowledge do you have? And are you morally upright? Because sometimes we can have the qualification, but our character is problematic. And this is where we again think about the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in terms of why did he come? What was the message? To perfect character. So I'm rushing now. To conclude this, what we need to be aware of is that in Islam, there's absolutely no differentiation between sacred knowledge and non-sacred knowledge. Aqli and naqli, revealed and non-revealed. Islam, we have drawn those lines ourselves. Right? We refer to it as Western knowledge. We say the child's got in Western knowledge. These dichotomies are unhelpful. We need to marry. All forms of knowledge can be to our benefit if used as such. Of course, there are forms of knowledge which are problematic, but that's our own doing. Right? We have to find a way of breaking down this dichotomy. We have to understand that having knowledge does not mean that you are educated. To draw on the works of Naqib al-Attas, who's a renowned Malaysian philosopher, he says, unless our knowledge results in good character, we have in fact not been educated. And I'll have to conclude that. Shukran so much.
Shukran, Professor Nuran. I recall about 10 or 15 years ago, I think I've heard you speak when I was still a student at IPSA, and you brought out some of the points that you've brought out, especially regarding Islamic education and the type of educated Muslim we are developing in our schools. And it pains me to hear that 10, 15 years later, you're asking those same questions, which I think points to some of the problems that we are experiencing, that years have passed and we bring out the same topics, so we really, how do we quantify, how do we measure and recognize any types of progress that we have made? It was interesting to note that we have an international guest, our keynote speaker, who came and lauded us for our institutionalizations, the Islamic, and the progresses that we make, and these were hard-fought battles that we have collectively. So I think the experience of people looking out and those within also gives us different experience. So, and I think each of our three panelists, who I think really am grateful for, they have brought out, each of them in interrelated ways, I think have brought out three central concepts. The first one being Islamic epistemology. What is an Islamic epistemology? How do we know what we know, and how do we know that we know it? Professor Fattar referred to it as applied Muslim epistemologies and demonstrated that how knowledge systems coexist and are mutually interdependent. And Dr. Fatima brought our attention to how empirical research shifts our knowing. And Professor Nuran noted how competing knowledges converge and shape not only what we know, but also what we learn and why we know what we know. So those are important. The second point, I think, that each of the presentations was the importance of coalescing theory to context and to practice. In its essence, Islamic education and the specific role it has in developing leadership is one that is rooted in and attuned to not only the broader context, but especially the situated context wherein Muslims live, where they learn and relate to others. These lived realities, or to use a very fancy academic term, the ontological, is a central consideration when thinking about the building blocks of Muslim leadership. The third and final concept that was prominently threaded through each of these presentations was the notion of the ethical, and its centrality to any discussion of leadership. I think with that, we're going to have a very condensed, given that we are running short of time. I'm seeing Sheikh Ihsan says we have to postpone we are running short of time, so maybe we can give the panel a chance to be part of the discussion in the next Q&A session, Sheikh. I think I'm sure each of the panelists has brought a lot of questions.
Sure, that's your prerogative. Sure, can't we take one question at least, especially when everybody is here? Just one question or two or three maximum. Because I don't see the point.
Okay. Yeah, I think each of we will keep it. Okay, so I encourage you, first of all, if you have a question, to come up to the front. Please, because we are short on time, keep your questions brief and indicate which of the panelists you're directing your question to. We'll give about 5 minutes to question and answer, Sheikh. Yes, please, if you have a question, come to the front with the... Okay, yeah, we'll take about two questions at a time. So if you have a question, the mic is here in the front. You can come to the front. There's a mic here to the front.
I think that will take more time if you bring the mic around. That will be quicker.
Give me some exercise.
Shukran, Sheikh. Ihsan, I appreciate the few more minutes. Dr. Fatima, I have a question. You spoke extensively about the law faculty and the Islamic scholarship that's very, very effective, and I must congratulate, because you all have done much more than any other faculty. But what about, you haven't introduced other faculties and how it can, or is there possibilities of research, Islamically, scholarship in those fields? Have you come across any? One more question.
Can you hear me? Okay, so my background is in secular South African law and Islamic law, but I think the concept can be applied across disciplines. So, for instance, I find it very interesting in Islamic law, if you accuse somebody, a woman in a marriage, that she has committed adultery, right? Then you have a process, and that the child that was born is not, you want to deny paternity of a child that was born to your wife. You enter a process called li'an, right? My teachers can correct me. You enter where each party, the woman takes an oath. It is my child, I did not engage in any adultery. Similarly, the man takes an oath, and that's how they decide whether the child belongs to the mother or not. I find it most amazing that they don't just use DNA. In an age where medical technology allows you to determine almost 99% the paternity of a child, why would you engage in a process called li'an, right? And the scholars, in fact, there's no consensus. Some say you can do DNA testing. Others say no, it has to be oath-taking with DNA testing. So there's numerous fields. I mean, AI, like Prof was talking about. And this is the thing with empirical. We're living in an age of data, right? Empirical research is about data. collecting data and utilizing the data to make better decisions. It doesn't have to be in law, it can be in medicine, it can be in the environment, in every sphere. But the problem is our scholars are just so narrow in their understanding of what scholarship is that we don't go beyond law. We're not even venturing into medicine, environment, AI. So yeah, definitely there's room for it beyond law.
Okay, we're going to take, thank you, Dr. Fatima. We have time for just one quick question, and please direct to whoever you want.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Fatima Hendricks here. I'm busy with my PhD in sociology at Ibn Khaldun University, so I'm really excited to be here. I have a question for Prof. Fattar, and I'm really thinking through the social conditions right now around why we are where we are in terms of what you're proposing in terms of activation. You mentioned or referred to elasticity, this kind of inflexibility, and I'm thinking about insularity and the reductionist, almost like not just the inflexibility and rigidity, but also just our insularity and how that is manifesting increasingly within the Muslim community. And I'm wondering if you can comment on that. My second question has to do with the notion of multiplexity. And I was thinking about, Dr. Fatima, what you were talking about evidence-based empiricism. And I'm wondering if a more apt description would be evidence-informed, because then we really use the tools in a multiplex way, having the different tools talking to each other, as opposed to it just being evidence-based, to a kind of broader opening up the decision-making and leaving more room for dialogue. Shukran. Thank you.
Okay, we'll give Professor Badawi.
Shukran, Dr. Fatima. Your question relates to, as far as I'm concerned, to operating with some kind of modesty about where the different communities are, to understand what keeps different communities insular, and why different communities don't cross boundaries to speak to other communities, and then to establish a kind of a set of safe spaces where these different communities with their different languages, incommensurable sometimes, come together and engage. So it is about establishing decorum, it is about being inviting, and it's about being entirely non-judgmental about what you can bring and what you don't know, and how you open yourself up to the possibility of getting to know. So it is, we are in that modest space, the space of establishing mutuality among and between different competing interests, and to mute those competitiveness and to bring people into the space of understanding and mutuality. This is a kind of a space, for example, that I think that we have to multiply in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fatma. Are you saying evidence-informed? Yes, sorry, I think that's broader and more inclusive, and I definitely think that probably captures the idea better than what evidence-based or empirical research does. A disclaimer is that, as I indicated, my field is law. Sociology has been a complete new, and I think that's the issue, is that one shouldn't be so confined to your discipline and that you don't move. We have to be more fluid in the way we move across disciplines and be open to learning. So for me, it was a wonderful experience moving into the realm of sociology, because the problem with law is it only takes you so far. Right? Legal rulings don't explain, like I explained, the woman, I couldn't understand when a woman comes to me and she says the husband's beating her up and he doesn't do this. Why are you with him after 15 years? There you have to move into the field of sociology, psychology. And that's important, is that you have a multidisciplinary understanding of a problem. And if you can't, like I'm a FAMIC mediator, we are required to mediate disputes with a mental health professional. Because I have limits as a lawyer, and that's important, is that we recognize our limits, but we're open to learning from other fields, and that we're fluid in that regard. And so I like your definition more.
Okay. Shukran. I apologize that we need to cut our Q&A session a bit short. We also have a string of online questions that I believe have been asked, which we will tend to at the next session as well. So I thank you all, our fellow panelists, and I ask that you please stay onto the stage. Sister Aisha has some presentations to make, the three panelists. Professor Nuran and Professor Aslam, if you don't mind. bring to the stage. Jazakallah khair.
Shukran for the thought-provoking session. I would like to kindly ask Prof. Aslam Fatar and Dr. Nuran to please be seated. And, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu narrated that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever does not thank people does not thank Allah. On that note, I would like to call upon IPSA board member Haj Sharif Abbas to award the panelists and the moderator a token of appreciation. Please give them a round of applause.
Yes. Okay.
Where's the photograph? Would like to call upon. Yeah, Doctor. Oh, sorry. Sheikh, can you get that photograph?
So the first award will go to Professor Mohammed Ali Belaa. Well done for your 3 minutes. And now, Professor Aslam Fatar.
Would like to call upon Dr. Nuran Davids, a certificate of appreciation. And then to give a certificate of appreciation to Dr. Fatima Yusuf. And then lastly, would like to call upon our lovely moderator, Dr. Nafisa Patel. And lastly, please give them a big round of applause. And then for now, we'll be taking a 5 minutes coffee break, which will come back at exactly in 5 minutes.